Charlie Adelson is 2 years into a life sentence for murder. Now he's trying to convince an appeals court to toss out that guilty verdict and start over.
Adelson is one of 5 people convicted in the murder for hire of his former brother-in-law, Dan Markel. A hearing today in Tallahassee could decide if that conviction sticks.
Stacey Inez inside that appeals courtroom this morning at the First District Court of Appeals. Stacey, fill us in.
Yeah, well, today Adelson's attorney argued that the trial was unfair based on jury selection, along with media coverage surrounding the case spanning for nearly a decade before the trial. However, the judges in today's appeal also referenced some similar precedent from a similar case, citing that a change of request for the venue should have happened at the end of jury selection. Now, Michael Ufferman, Adelson's attorney today, argued potential jurors violated the judge's orders before the trial to not talk about the case. Ufferman says one potential juror told others that Adelson was guilty. In the appeal hearing today, the judges pointed out that those potential jurors were released and never actually served on the trial. Now, the state argued today it's not about whether that jury was exposed to media coverage before the trial, saying it's about whether or not they can set that exposure aside to judge the case fairly. They also pointed out that 12 jurors selected all said they could be fair and impartial in the Adelson case, and that Adelson accepted the jury.
The nature of the coverage matters a lot, too, and the nature in relation to the time of the trial. And there's nothing in the record to indicate that there was negative publicity about Mr. Adelson around the time of his trial that would influence the jurors to reach a guilty verdict instead of an innocent, or instead of acquitting him.
But then when you have jurors disregarding court orders, when you have jurors who are lying directly to the judge and saying that they formed no opinion, and yet they're either writing on social media with their opinion of my client being guilty, or going back and talking to other jurors and saying that my client is guilty, that's not fair. And at the end of the day, what we need is a fair process.
Now, Ufferman claims that if 2 potential jurors could lie about whether or not they could judge the case fairly, then other jurors who were selected could have also lied, leading to his claims of a tainted jury. Now, no decision was made by the Court of Appeals today, and we do know that process could end up taking months. And Julie and Jacob, I'll send it back to you as we take a closer look at what's next for this case.